This is a model of a mid-sized airfield. I have named it Pegasus Field. Pegasus Field has two radio frequencies, a ground frequency of 121.7 and a tower frequency of 118.8. The ground frequency of 121.7 is used by the air traffic controllers to control all vehicle and aircraft traffic on the ground within the bounds of the airfield. Just like in a city, we need roads to get around on an airport. And these are the roads where the vehicles and the aircraft travel. Only on an airport, we don't call them roads, we call them taxiways. And taxiways are identified by letter. So in other words, this is taxiway Juliet, taxiway Foxtrot, and of course taxiway Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, whatever. And believe it or not, pilots do get lost on airports, and so there are signs to enable them to find their way around. And the taxiways are identified by letters, and the signs are yellow with black letters on them. Now, on the model I have these signs lying flat, but in actual fact they stand up like road signs. There are also other signs to enable the pilot to find out which taxiway he is on. For instance, this is taxiway Bravo or taxiway Foxtrot. And these signs are black with white letters. And again, they are not painted on the taxiway like I have on the model. They stand up like road signs. Taxiways also have a center line on them to enable the pilot to keep in the center, but I left them off to save the confusion. There are a multitude of signs on an airport, way beyond the capabilities of this model to show you, but there is one I want to point out to you, and that is this sign here. The sign is red. Red in any language usually means stop, and that's exactly what this sign means. This sign is telling the pilot that he's on taxiway Juliet, and runway 30 is to the left, and runway 12 is to the right, and he must stop or hold before crossing that line. And this leads me to the most important sign on a taxiway, is this sign. These are called hold signs, H-O-L-D. And if you notice on the model, any taxiway has them, and no one is allowed in a vehicle or an aircraft to cross that hold line without permission from the air traffic control tower. Otherwise, they would be on the runway. So that's a safety feature, the hold line. So, there we are, we have the taxiways. Places for the aircraft to get around, the yellow and black signs to indicate where the pilot is. Okay, well, the main reason for an airport, of course, is for aircraft to land and take off, so we need runways. And there are different types of runways with different capabilities to allow pilots to land and take off in different types of weather. So we'll look at the most basic one first. But first I should tell you how runways are designated. Runways are designated in the direction in which they point magnetically with reference to magnetic north. So if you look here, you will see the north point. So we'll work our way around in a clockwise direction, and I'll explain what the numbering means on the runways. So here's north, 360 degrees. This runway points to 220 degrees magnetic. Therefore, it's runway 22. This runway points to 300 degrees magnetic. Therefore, it's 30. This is 40 degrees magnetic. Therefore, it's 04. Notice that it's 180 degrees opposite this one, or the reciprocal. And of course, runway 120, 120 degrees. Now, I mentioned that they have instruments for different types of weather conditions. And the most simple runway is the one without instrument aids. And this is a typical example of that type of runway. and they are for VFR traffic, Visual Flight Rules Traffic. The pilot has lots of visibility and he can fly with reference to the ground. So let's have a look what this runway is made of. It's runway 22, therefore it's pointing to 220 degrees. A pilot landing on this or taking off on this would have his compass and his heading indicator pointing to 220 degrees. And it also has a dashed line along the center to help him keep in the center of the runway. The runway 04 has a little more aid. When the visibility isn't as good and the weather is a little bit more terrible, this has instruments that will give the pilot lateral aid. Lateral means side to side. It will tell him if he is to the left of the runway, the right of the runway, or if he's on the runway. It will guide him to the runway, but no altitude information. This has different markings. If you notice, it's runway 04, 40 degrees. It has the dashed center line, but it also has these great big white bars on the threshold of the runway, and that's to aid the pilot to give him visibility to see where the end of the runway is. So we have the normal VFR runway and the limited instrument runway for side to side or lateral aid. Then we have the fully instrumented runway. This has all the bells and whistles. This has instruments that will aid the pilot from side to side and also altitude information. So the combination of these two, the side by side or lateral and altitude, will enable him to become established on what is called a glide path. And this glide path is just like a big arrow pointing down to the runway. And that can guide him in the most terrible weather. So let's have a look at the markings on this runway. It's runway 30, pointing to 300 degrees. It has the dashed center line up the middle. But to aid in times of poor visibility, it also has solid lines along the edges of the runway. It has the dashed lines on the threshold of the runway to help the pilot find it. And it also has these big squares. They are called the touchdown zone. And if a pilot can put his plane down in the vicinity of that touchdown zone, it means that he has lots of room to bring that aircraft under control on that runway. There are other aids too. You see these decreasing dashed lines. They are normally 500 feet apart, and they give a pilot an idea of how much runway he is using up. So there we have the three different types of runways. The VFR runway, when the visibility is great. The partially instrumented runway, when it's not so nice in the weather. And for the real nasty weather, we have the fully instrumented runway.